Today I'm talking to Julian Langworthy, the Chief Winemaker from Deep Woods Estate in Margaret River. And Deep Woods, of course, is one of the Real Review's top wineries of the year for 2022. Congratulations, Julian, and welcome to the Real Review.
Thank you very much, Huon. It's a great pleasure to be here and a great honour to be included in the top wineries in Australia this year. Very excited.
This 2020 is a lovely wine. You've been making Chardonnay for a number of years and you've got it worked out, presumably, your fruit sourcing. And there's that whole north-south thing in Margaret River. And can you tell us where the grapes for this wine come from?
Saying I had it worked out would be overstating it a bit. I think you're always trying to improve. But this wine each year comes from Willabrra and from Wallcliffe. So the reserve wines for Deep Woods aren't single vineyard wines. We also make some single vineyard Chardonnays as well. But this wine comes from 3 vineyards, 2 from central Willabrra and 1 from further south in southern Wallcliffe. It's funny, the north-south divide in Margaret River, because some of our colder sites or even the most appropriate soil types are actually in Willabrra, which is sort of central north Margaret River, if you like.
It's interesting, isn't it? You can get some wonderful Chardonnays from the north, but on paper it looks like it's more of a Cabernet part of Margaret River, and perhaps the south is more of a white wine area.
It's funny, isn't it? Margaret River is such a diverse region when it comes to microclimates. There's so much influence from your topography with the coastline in Margs and with your soil type. So I thought that, Huon, I'm a Margaret River born and bred local, but I'd never really worked in the region until I moved back to Deep Woods 11 years ago. And I just assumed that the further south we go and the colder it gets, the better the Chardonnays would be. It depends on your site. There's beautiful Chardonnays that come out of the south, but I actually probably, hand on my heart, prefer the north and central areas of Margaret River for really high-end Chardonnay.
Very good. You do have those wonderful gravelly soils up in the Willabrra area, and they seem to be fantastic for just about everything, don't they?
Absolutely. It's funny, Huon, actually, when you mention those wonderful gravelly soils, we focus almost entirely our Cabernet project on that soil type. That Chardonnay there actually comes from probably... They've sandier, more silver sands, quite deep sandy soils, still over clay, and still a little bit of gravel through them, but we seem to get amazing minerality and real lovely acid retention from these sort of slightly sandier soil types in Margaret River, and that's where some of our focus is with our top Chardonnay project.
I guess you can also throw in the wild card of seasonal variation, and 2019 was a cooler year, I believe, and possibly a little bit marginal for Cabernet. And maybe that was the sort of year where you'd use more northern Margaret River Cabernet.
Well, with our amazingly consistent vintages, but we have had some very cool ones in recent years. 15, 17 and 19 have all been really quite cool seasons. 2020 was a more standard average season, warm in fact, but we still managed to get beautiful natural acidity. It's adding acid is not something we need to do in Margaret River, which we're pretty fortunate for. So you have wines with great ripeness and power, but real tension, drive, and mouth-watering acidity, which is a pretty good combination to have.
So I know this is a Dorothy Dixer, and every winemaker says the best vintage is the one they're selling now, but out of the last few vintages that you've just reeled off, which is your favourite?
My absolute favourite is 2017. We were quite lucky at Deep Woods with the Reserve Chardonnay, which was only the second vintage that I ever made of it, which is the 2013. We won the James Halliday Chardonnay Challenge, and we got a bit of notoriety and recognition around that. And the wines, I think, have been getting better and better. And I think 2017 was a bit of a watershed moment when we really started to mature the Chardonnay program. And for that reason, the 2017 is one of my absolute favourites. And all joking aside, the 2020 is probably likely my second favourite vintage.
No, I wouldn't argue with you there. But I'm going back a few years now to when, before you went to Western Australia, or went back to Western Australia, you worked at Wynns Coonawarra. Can you just give us a little contrast about having worked in the two regions, and they're both great Cabernet regions, which probably are a bit competitive. How do you characterise the two regions for Cabernet?
It was, well, my life in wine has been largely focused on Cabernet. Even I went from Coonawarra to Clare, and, I love the variety. It's awesome. And I absolutely loved working at Wins. I was in Coonawarra for 5 years, and working with Sue Hodder and the guys over there was a great honour and privilege. I think Coonawarra, for me, you'd characterise it as being distinctly Australian. It's Cabernet and it's Australian Cabernet, like it has great strength. It takes oak well. It has really dark to red fruits, quite resolved, but plentiful tannins. I think Margaret River Cabernets are slightly more understated, a little bit more international in vein. They're not as heavily stamped by the region, perhaps, as Coonawarra is. And you've got slightly finer, more elegant tannin structures in Margaret River, and probably a slightly more kind of marine minerality quality to the tannin. Making wine there's quite different. In Coonawarra, I sort of found, or I felt, the picking window is much smaller to get it right, whereas Margaret River, we're sort of blessed by warm but cool late season conditions and quite slow ripening, which makes the winemaker's job particularly easy in that regard. But I love both the regions, and I also really like Yarra Valley Cabernets. And I think, Cabernet's one of the great bargains in Australia at the moment. You get some of the world's best wines for some crazy prices.
Yeah, and I think Margaret River is being maritime. You don't have that terrible frost problem that Coonawarra has either, which is a great bonus. Has to be a great bonus. But another question I wanted to ask you is about cellaring, because Cabernet is one of the great cellaring varieties that we can have anywhere in the world. I wonder if you think that people are actually cellaring Cabernet the way they used to, or are they drinking it younger?
I think it's undoubted that people are drinking these wines younger. And I think it's probably good winemaking practice to be ensuring that they're enjoyable at a young age as well. I think we've probably changed a lot of things. I would like to think all of my wines are relatively accessible and enjoyable on release. And I think that's just modern winemaking and sensible winemaking in the current climate. That said, you're 100% correct. Cabernet is one of those varieties that you get untold joy out of cellaring. And so when you've really got devotees that are, have got their wine fridges or their cellars or whatever it happens to be, I think even sometimes 2 to 3 years in a cellar can just make these wines so much more, so many more layers, so much more complexity. And hopefully people are buying wine fridges and putting some Cabernet in them.
Totally agree. People often think that cellaring wine means chucking it into a vault and throwing away the key for 20 years. But even I'm fond of telling people that even Riesling, after 2 or 3 years, makes a lovely, a different creature altogether. And a little bit of cellaring is a great thing.
It's all about tannin ripeness and more sympathetic oak use and maceration sort of decisions. We're lucky in Margaret River because we do get really, really ripe tannin structures without overt amounts of alcohol. And that, I feel, makes a massive difference to the accessibility of the wines when young. We're using less oak and less time in oak. So Deepwoods Reserve Cabernet quite often will still be 40, 50% oak, but they're much more structural wine. But say something like our Hillside Cabernet at $25 to $28. Small amount of new oak, largely seasoned oak. We're racking them less. They're getting pressed off skins slightly earlier. But the ultimate bit is great vineyard practice. You're talking about well-managed canopies that have lots of light ingress and enough time on the vine to really resolve those tannins into beautiful, silky, fine kind of, violet-laden dreams, if you will, Huon.
Very poetic, Julian. Well, thanks, Julian, for your time today. It's been great talking to you. Julian Langworthy, Chief Winemaker, Deepwoods Estate, Margaret River, one of our top wineries of the year for 2022 at the Real Review. Congratulations again, and thanks for joining us, and onwards and upwards.
My absolute pleasure, Huon. Thank you for having me, and lovely to chat today.